Hi, in this demo, I'm going to show you how to create custom scorers on any criteria you want, run them on tests over your agent outputs, and compare the results to find where your agents are going right and going wrong. Let's start by navigating to the scorers page on the Judgment Labs platform, where I can click this button to create a new scorer. Today, we're going to be evaluating a travel agent that generates itineraries for different trips. And the first score that I might be interested in creating is what I would call budget accuracy. And what I'm going to consider budget accuracy is the measure of whether or not there are any issues associated with the budget. So here we are on the playground. We can generate different scorers and evaluators using any model or any LMS judge that we want. And so today, let's select GPT-5 for our model, and we can use any judgment model on top of this. So we support all sorts of models, ranging from the open source ones to custom fine-tuned models that you might be able to host yourself. Everything under the sun works with judgment, and you select your prompt here, where we are just going to type this in, and we'll see the power of the customization. If we want to judge the quality over our budget, we might be interested in measuring something along the lines of, does the proposed budget have any mistakes in calculation or planning? We can say that this is some kind of yes or no decision, and we'll just clarify that this is a proposed budget in the itinerary within a plan. And then we should also probably specify that if the itinerary doesn't contain a budget, then we should be okay. So great. And then we can also specify variables, which is super powerful. So we can do something like this, input query to the agent, and then the double curly brackets gives us the ability to input a variable. And then we can also specify that the output response from agent generating the itinerary is going to be another variable, which we will call, let's say, actual output. And finally, we're going to specify whether or not this score should pass or not. So let's just call this 0.5, and the reason why is because we can specify the scores here. And so, for example, we have some kind of scores that we want to associate with this judge's decision. So if there's no issues, that's a good thing. So we're going to give that a score of 1. And if there is an issue, then we're going to give it a score of 0. So that the threshold is such that if we have a 1, we're all good. And if we fail, then we'll see a failure there, and that's what we want. The nice thing about our playground is that you can also test for very specific examples to make sure that your LLM judges or your scorers are actually acting in the ways that you want them to, and that they are well aligned, so that you can make the adjustments to the prompt or to the model to make sure that it does better. So for example, let's dump in a sample itinerary here where we're going to Tokyo. Let's drop in a sample input like take me on a trip to Tokyo from October 15th to the 22nd. And we can actually run that score down here and just see the results. And typically what we want to do is check whether or not this scorer seems well aligned with my expectation, which is something that we can see down here. So because the itinerary doesn't have a budget or cost details, there's nothing to evaluate, so then it should choose N, which it does, which is great. So you can test this as much as we want, but for now, let's just create this score. I've created a number of other scorers here. So for example, we have one that checks the accuracy over locations in an itinerary that all exist and are currently open. So just checking if we have any outdated information where it's telling us to go somewhere that's permanently closed. Or if we have any duplicate visits to any landmarks because I don't have a lot of time on my trip, I just want to make sure that I hit all the great locations. So now let's put this into action. So if I go to my project here with this travel agent and I go straight to my testing or datasets page, we can run a test. So for here, we're going to run it from the datasets page, and that's because I want to give you some insight into what we're running this over. If I go into this dataset, here I've saved a bunch of actual itineraries that this agent has generated. So I can go through here, see what's being generated, and I can see that this is like a legitimate travel itinerary to Tokyo. These places is like very real. It's a great itinerary, some mistakes in them that we will probably see, but overall, they're all right. Now compare that to the faulty batch, which has a bunch of made up itineraries. So these itineraries are taking you to places that don't actually exist. There's many mistakes when it comes to places where the locations are just fictitious or the information is super outdated, and that's here to show us the difference between these two evaluations. So let's create a test on each. So I can call this a faulty batch, and then we're going to call this itinerary to represent the quality over the itinerary, and I'm going to select all of my scores. So let's say I want this itinerary locations, itinerary duplicates, and budget accuracy. It's great. I can run all of those. And then while that runs, I'm also going to go to my successful batch and start the same set of tests. So let's call this a successful batch. We'll call this itinerary for itinerary quality. And then I can select the same scores to run. Fantastic. So we're going to let that run for a little bit. And what we should see is the results will pile in on the testing page here. I've already compiled a bunch of different results from all sorts of scores, ranging from factuality to the faithfulness over the outputs, to the hallucination rates, to the quality of itinerary locations, to the quality of any duplicates in the itinerary. And I can view all of my past sort of tests here. And I can also analyze success rates. So I can see how my different tests are going over time. So lately we've been doing a pretty bad job, but maybe a little bit better. And then we can also see different things like how many scores are passing. We have a bunch of different scores that are passing. This gives you the overall pass rates on all your test cases. And then we can see each individual score here. So we can already see our first set of batches have come through. So we can see here, if I open up this faulty batch, I get this whole distribution of scores across all of my different metrics that I want to take a look at. And so if you recall, this is a problem because if I inspect one of these cases, for example, for this trip to Tokyo, the issue is that a lot of these itinerary places are not real. So for example, it's telling us to take an overnight train from New York to Tokyo Central, so there's no sort of place there to do that. These skyscrapers don't exist, and the museums don't exist. Another good example might be something when it comes to a trip to New York. So you might have issues with numerous items being fictitious. There's no JFK International Spaceport, of course. There are also some duplicated visits that we didn't want to do, and so we get that measurement right away. And so the cool thing is that I can isolate for specific concepts that I want to see going up or down, depending on the quality of my outputs. And so if I revisit this page, the successful batch should also be in. That's great. We can see that we're doing a little bit better in terms of scores, no longer all the way over here. Got some successful itinerary locations there, less duplicates, we're doing a better job. So let's look at an example of this. So inside of this budget, and this itinerary that was created, we have all the places being real, no issues with that. And if we go to one that has a problem, so I'll go to one where the red is here. Let's click on here. So most of the places are real, but some of them aren't verifiable businesses, right? Or maybe I have another issue where if I click on this one, we'll see something interesting, which is that this Sequoia place has been closed since 2016, right? Which means that even though the entire itinerary as a whole looks pretty good, there are some issues that come with the fact that this location is real and yet just closed now, so it's not a good itinerary anymore. So this gives you a concept of how you can see the quality shift over time with different changes that you make, and this becomes even more apparent when you compare experiments. So if I click this comparison button, I can literally compare against any other experiment that I've run. Let's do the one that I just ran. And we can see across each metric how these scores are improving. So for example, we're going from 0 to 10% on budget accuracy. We are doing much better for itinerary locations. We can see that this distribution is being showed with the gray and orange. You can also see how things have gotten better over time. And we can also inspect specific diffs. So if I go here and I look at something like a shift from a bad itinerary location to a good one, then we can take a look at how this is performing. So maybe here we have a diff that shows us 2 trips to Barcelona. We can see the exact diff on where these things stay the same and where they differ. We can also go down straight to the outputs and see how the different quality stacks up along different sort of criteria and where they're still perhaps not perfect but getting better over time. Or for example, maybe we could pull up something like an instance where the itinerary locations accuracy goes up. So maybe an example of that could be here. And so from this trip to Rome, we're going to have an improvement over the locations. They are real compared to they're fake, and they give you a full explanation why. So you can see that on judgment, we allow you to run different experiments using any score you want, any LLM as judge, any model powering that. You can customize it towards any way that you need. And we allow you to visualize all of the results, run the experiments straight from the UI, and then compare them to see how your changes are improving over time. Happy building and happy monitoring. We are super excited to see what you all build.